The steam-filled bathroom hummed with the low, rhythmic pulse of the rainfall shower, the hot water cascading over Oliver Stone's sculpted form like a cleansing baptism. But in a flash, the serenity shattered. An awkward crack echoed as porcelain met tile, the sound reverberating through the penthouse like the breaking of an unspoken rule. Oliver, the 38-year-old billionaire, froze under the water's torrent, the sting of the accident settling on his skin. He had retreated to his oasis, a place of calm after another cold, heartless boardroom meeting. His empire built on precision, his emotions buried behind layers of calculated distance. Then, with a jarring crash, the bathroom door flew open. In tumbled Maya Collins, his new maid, clumsy, sweet, and dreadfully embarrassed. A woman of 24, fresh out of college, who had just started working for him 2 weeks ago. But Maya had already made her mark with her spectacular series of accidents. Knocked over coffee mugs, spilled cleaning supplies, and her latest mishap, a shower disaster. Her uniform, a crisp white blouse and black skirt, clung to her drenched body, revealing the very clumsiness that had earned her a reputation. But in this moment, she wasn't just the maid. She was vulnerable. Her hazel eyes wide with shock, hair damp from the shower spray, and the scent of lemon-scented cleaner still lingering in the air. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This helps us grow. Now back to the story. Maya's feet slipped on the marble tiles, and her arms flailed helplessly, sending her tumbling toward the floor. Her startled gasp echoed in the room as she crashed forward, her body colliding with Oliver's chest, his bare, wet chest. He reacted instinctively, his strong arms shooting out to catch her mid-fall, pulling her flush against his body. The proximity between them felt too close, too personal. Maya, a whirlwind of good intentions and embarrassing mishaps, felt a rush of panic at the closeness. She could feel the warmth of Oliver's skin against hers, his steady heartbeat beneath her palm. At 24, Maya had seen her fair share of struggles, working at a local cafe, struggling to make ends meet. But none of her awkward moments had ever led to this, falling into the arms of the very man she worked for. Her heart raced, her breath hitched. In the flurry of the fall, her blouse, soaked through with water, clung to her body, leaving her exposed, her vulnerability clear. Maya felt the weight of the situation, as if the world had paused to witness her disgrace.
I'm so sorry, she stammered, her cheeks burning with humiliation. I didn't mean to.
Oliver, stunned but steady, held her tightly in his arms. The vulnerability in her eyes mirrored the emotion that flickered in his chest, a deep, raw reaction he couldn't explain. He pulled her closer, instinctively keeping her from slipping further. Time seemed to freeze between them. Her damp blouse, clinging to her frame, only heightened the physicality of their proximity. He could feel the heat radiating off her, and in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. For just a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Maya's hands, trembling, grasped Oliver's shoulders for stability. But there was something else in that contact, something unspoken, something they both couldn't ignore. Her hazel eyes locked with his stormy green ones, and for a moment, it wasn't about a fall, it was about something deeper. Oliver's mind raced. What if this fall wasn't an accident? What if it was fate nudging me to feel again? As Maya's fingers tightened around his arms, whispering, "Please don't fire me," something in him shifted. It wasn't just a slip. It was a collision. One that could either break them apart or ignite something neither of them could control. Oliver Stone had never been one to believe in fate. His life was one of control, his empire built on cold calculations, his personal life locked behind emotional walls. He didn't let anyone in. But from the moment Maya stumbled into his world, everything had started to glitch. In that moment, as he steadied her trembling form, he realized that maybe it was time to let go of the perfectly constructed life he'd spent years building. The water, the slip, the fall. Everything felt surreal, like a glitch in a system he had long thought flawless. As Maya pulled away, her face flushed with embarrassment, Oliver felt a strange sensation swirl in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the cool detachment he prided himself on. Maya stammered, trying to straighten herself and apologize once more, but her voice was drowned out by the rising heat of the moment. For a brief, maddening second, Oliver simply stared at her. The woman standing before him, wet and vulnerable, dripping water onto his marble floors like a clumsy storm. He should have said something, anything, to end the awkwardness. But the words didn't come. Instead, he stepped back, running a hand through his damp hair, suddenly aware of how badly his heart was pounding. What is wrong with me? I'll just... Maya trailed off, pulling herself up off the floor and straightening her blouse, her eyes darting anywhere but his face. She started to walk away, but her feet, slick from the water, betrayed her again. She wobbled slightly, and Oliver instinctively caught her again. Are you all right? His voice was low, controlled, though there was an edge to it, a tension he couldn't quite hide. Maya nodded, her expression embarrassed, the flush in her cheeks still bright as she stood there, awkwardly clutching her blouse as if she were trying to hide herself from him. I'm fine, really, she mumbled, finally breaking away from his touch and stepping towards the door. Take your time cleaning up, he said, his voice softer now, almost a suggestion. I'll leave you to it. Maya didn't look up at him as she stepped out of the bathroom, but she couldn't help the faint shudder that ran through her as she passed through the door. She felt exposed, more so than she ever had. For the rest of the day, Maya busied herself with cleaning the rest of the penthouse, trying desperately to put the fall and the intense, heart-stopping moment that followed out of her mind. But how could she? Each time she moved, each time she reached to dust or clean a surface, the feeling of Oliver's hands on her, steady, protective, lingered in her body like an imprint. She'd never had a man look at her like that, let alone touch her. Not since ever. Maya's days were usually filled with small, forgettable moments of carelessness, knocking over cleaning supplies, tripping over herself, spilling coffee on her uniform. But today felt different. Every clumsy movement she made now felt like a mistake. And yet, something about her constant errors seemed to charm Oliver in ways she couldn't fully understand. That night, as she cleaned the dining room, a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Collins? It was Oliver's voice, calling through the door with a firmness that almost sounded gentle. Could you come here for a moment? Her heart skipped a beat as she stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He was always so controlled, so poised. Why did he need her now, after the disaster that had unfolded earlier? Sure, she replied, trying to sound calm as she wiped her hands on her skirt and made her way to the door. When she opened it, she found Oliver standing there, dressed casually in a simple gray sweater and black jeans, his eyes soft but unreadable. I wanted to apologize, he began, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable earlier. I wasn't expecting that. Maya blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. It's fine, she said, feeling her cheeks flush again. Really, it's not a big deal. No, it is, he insisted, stepping closer, but not too close. I didn't handle it well. I don't want you to feel like you can't do your job because of me. For a moment, Maya simply stared at him, feeling the weight of the words he'd just said. Was he really apologizing? For something that had been an accident? She was the one who had stumbled, who had fallen into him, not the other way around. It's okay, she said softly. I understand. Oliver's lips twitched, and he almost smiled. I don't think you do. Before she could respond, he turned and started walking down the hallway. Let me know if you need anything, he called over his shoulder, his voice unexpectedly warm. Maya stood there for a moment, a strange feeling of both relief and confusion settling in her chest. What was it about this man that made her feel so unsettled? Days passed, and the dynamic between them shifted in ways Maya hadn't anticipated. The awkwardness between her and Oliver started to fade, but there was an unspoken tension between them, an energy that neither could ignore. The more time Maya spent in Oliver's penthouse, the more she noticed things about him, small details that made him seem less like the distant billionaire and more like a man with his own vulnerabilities. And the more she noticed, the more she couldn't stop thinking about him. Oliver, too, began to find himself watching her more closely. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance when she wasn't looking, the way his gaze would soften whenever she tripped over herself or knocked something over. But the more he saw her, the more he realized that his initial impression of Maya, clumsy, inexperienced, and out of place, wasn't quite accurate. She was all of those things, but there was something more. There was a sincerity about her that cut through his walls, a rawness that left him exposed in ways he didn't want to be. For the first time in a long while, Oliver found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about connection. Maya didn't fit into his world. She wasn't polished or refined, but there was something about her that made him feel more alive than he'd felt in years. She had a way of making him laugh, even when the jokes were silly. Her genuine smile, her vulnerability, it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could be more than just the man who built an empire. And yet, there was a growing sense of discomfort within him. Was he falling for someone who wasn't even remotely in his league? Was his attraction to Maya just another glitch in his system? Maya, for her part, couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him either. But with that pull came a heavy dose of reality. She was a maid, just another hired hand in his world of wealth and privilege. Oliver Stone's world didn't have room for someone like her, someone who could barely pay off her student loans and lived paycheck to paycheck. Still, as the days went on, their paths crossed more and more. A chance encounter in the kitchen, a casual chat in the hallway. Slowly they began to open up to each other, sharing pieces of their lives in ways that neither of them expected. Oliver's walls, built so carefully over the years, were beginning to crack. Each time Maya smiled, each time she fumbled through a sentence with that sweet, innocent sincerity, it was like a little more of him slipped away. But Maya, for all her clumsiness, was starting to feel the weight of the divide between them. She didn't belong in his world. She wasn't meant for this life of luxury and sophistication. But with every glance they shared, with every laugh they exchanged, she wondered if maybe she wasn't as out of place as she thought. Maya had always been the kind of person who didn't fit neatly into boxes. She wasn't clumsy by nature, but the world around her seemed to conspire against her grace. It wasn't that she couldn't be careful, it was that the universe had an odd way of humbling her at every turn. Today, she was balancing a tray of coffee mugs, moving with as much caution as a tightrope walker in the circus. She passed the gleaming granite counter, stepped into the living room, and, just as she was about to deliver the coffee to Oliver's desk, she collided with the edge of the coffee table. Her wrist jerked, the mugs tipped, and the coffee splashed across the floor in a slow-motion disaster. "Damn it!" she hissed, staring down at the spill. The rich scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting up from the tiles. She froze, her body frozen in embarrassment. Oliver was standing at the other end of the room, his back to her as he scrolled through his phone, likely unaware of her impending disaster. Taking a deep breath, Maya bent down to clean it up, but her knees buckled as she tried to crouch. The marble floors, slick with the coffee, betrayed her balance, sending her sprawling forward, palms first into the wet mess. A muffled laugh broke the tension. She froze. Not in embarrassment, but because it wasn't the kind of laugh she'd expected. Oliver had turned around, a smile tugging at his lips, his eyes crinkling at the edges. It wasn't mocking, or cold, or impatient. It was genuine amusement. Careful, Maya, he said with a soft chuckle, watching her scramble to clean herself up. Looks like the coffee's not the only thing that's spilled. Maya glanced up, meeting his eyes, and the familiar flush crept back up her neck. Sorry, she muttered again, this time more to herself than to him. She fumbled with the towel in her hands, trying to wipe the sticky mess from the floor, but Oliver didn't look at her with disappointment. Instead, he walked over, his steps slow and purposeful, until he stood beside her. He took the towel from her hand, bending down with a grace that made her feel like an amateur. Let me help, he said, his voice gentle, his movements deliberate as he wiped up the remaining coffee. She watched him, momentarily stunned by his sudden attentiveness. It was strange, this shift in his demeanor. It wasn't like the cold, aloof billionaire she had met when she first started working for him. No. There was something different now, something warmer. I don't want to be a bother, Maya said, still kneeling on the floor, her voice unsure. You're not, Oliver replied, his tone calm, almost tender. You're just yourself. He finished cleaning the floor, then stood, offering his hand to help her up. Maya hesitated for a moment, staring at his hand before accepting it. As he pulled her gently to her feet, she couldn't help but notice how strong his grip was. Thank you, she said quietly, her gaze meeting his for the briefest of moments. Something shifted then, an understanding. Neither of them said it aloud, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement that they weren't just playing the roles of employer and employee anymore. Later that evening, after a long day of work, Maya sat at the kitchen counter, absently sorting through her cleaning supplies. The penthouse felt quieter in the late hours, the sounds of traffic and city life outside muffled by the walls of glass and steel. The silence between her and Oliver had become a comfortable one, no longer filled with awkwardness, but with an unspoken connection. Oliver entered the room, his presence barely breaking the stillness. He was holding a bottle of wine in his hand. Thought you might like a glass, he said, his voice low as he moved toward the counter where she sat. Wine? Maya blinked in surprise. I don't know if I should, Mr. Stone. Call me Oliver, he interrupted with a gentle smile. And you've been working hard today. It's just a glass. Maya hesitated, still unsure. She had never been one for drinking, but there was something about Oliver's easy confidence that made her want to say yes. All right, just one, she agreed, her tone light, and she watched as Oliver poured 2 glasses. He slid one across to her, then took a sip of his own. So, he began, leaning against the counter, how have you been adjusting to all this? His hand waved in the air, gesturing to the grandeur of the penthouse. I know it's a lot to take in. Maya shifted in her seat, suddenly self-conscious again. The question was harmless enough, but it struck at a vulnerable part of her, her feelings of being out of place in this polished world. I'm fine, she said quickly, taking a sip of the wine, trying to mask her discomfort. I mean, it's just different, you know? Oliver nodded, studying her with an intensity she wasn't used to. I get it. This isn't exactly where you thought you'd be at 24. Maya's eyes flickered to the floor, her fingers tightening around the stem of the glass. I didn't exactly plan on being a maid. I was working at a coffee shop before this. Things didn't really work out there. She was surprised by how easily the words came out, as if the weight of the truth didn't feel as heavy when it was shared with someone who was actually listening. Oliver didn't say anything for a moment, but then he spoke, his voice calm and steady. I understand more than you think. I wasn't born into this either. You know, I had to work for everything I have. It wasn't always easy. Maya blinked, not expecting him to be so open. She had only ever seen him as the distant, sharp-edged CEO. To hear him talk about his past, about struggles, made him feel human. Not just a man who was untouchable, but someone who had to fight to get where he was. "Tell me about it," Maya said quietly, her curiosity piqued. Oliver hesitated, his gaze distant as he took another sip of wine. "I grew up in a small town," he began slowly, his voice softening with the memory. "My mom worked 2 jobs, just to keep food on the table. She did everything she could to make sure I had the opportunities I needed, even when we didn't have much. I didn't have much of a childhood, just a lot of time spent coding, teaching myself. I made a lot of mistakes, but eventually I built something that worked." Maya nodded, impressed by his honesty. "That's incredible." "It wasn't easy," he added with a small smile. "I lost a lot along the way, but it brought me here." Maya took a deep breath, contemplating his words. "I get it. I've had my share of struggles too," she said, her voice quieter now. "My grandmother raised me after my parents. Well, they weren't around. She taught me that it's okay to mess up, as long as you keep trying." "Sounds like a strong woman," Oliver remarked, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "She was," Maya agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. "She still is. Even if she's in the background of my life, I know she's still rooting for me." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared confessions settling between them. Maya realized that, despite the vast gulf between their worlds, there was something profoundly real about this conversation. She wasn't just the maid in Oliver's eyes. He saw her, really saw her, as more than just the sum of her clumsiness. "I'm glad you shared that," she said quietly, looking up at him. "Me too," Oliver replied, his tone soft and genuine. The connection between them felt different now, more personal, more grounded in their shared humanity than the roles they played in the world. For the first time, Maya felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't out of place here. As Maya and Oliver continued to speak, the walls that had once separated them began to crumble. They were no longer 2 people just coexisting in the same space. In that moment, Maya realized that Oliver was beginning to see her, not just as a maid, but as someone worthy of being seen. And in that quiet, unspoken exchange, she found herself wondering just how far this unlikely bond could go. Maya was getting used to the way Oliver's presence made her heart flutter, not in the romantic, cliché kind of way, but in a way that made her body feel like it couldn't quite keep up. She never asked for this connection, never sought the undercurrent of attraction that seemed to grow each day, but it was there. She felt it in the way her pulse quickened whenever she bumped into him, and she saw it in the way his eyes lingered just a fraction too long. It was all so dangerous. Oliver was not just any man. He was Oliver Stone, a billionaire with a life she could never imagine being a part of. She was still figuring out how to keep her own life together, balancing a maid's uniform with a fractured sense of self-worth and an intense fear of failure. Meanwhile, he was this untouchable force, polished, perfect, always in control. She was constantly aware of their differences. The gap between them was vast, and every awkward moment, every stumble, made it more obvious. But something strange was happening. As much as Maya tried to distance herself from him, something kept drawing her in. It all started one evening when she was vacuuming the hallway, trying desperately to avoid another spill. She had learned to move slowly, deliberately, but the corners of the penthouse seemed to have a way of tripping her up no matter what. She was just rounding the corner, halfway through another vacuuming round when she bumped into him. Again. Oliver was standing in front of the glass doors, his back turned as he looked out over the city, deep in thought. He hadn't heard her approach. "God, I'm sorry," Maya said, immediately stepping back, panicking that she'd knocked something over. "I wasn't paying attention." To her surprise, Oliver didn't seem frustrated. In fact, he seemed more amused than anything else. He turned slowly, an eyebrow raised in that familiar, teasing way of his. You're going to wear out the carpet if you keep bumping into people. Maya blinked, her stomach tightening. I didn't mean to. Relax, he said with a chuckle, his tone easy and unbothered. You're not hurting anything. Maya bit her lip, struggling to find words. It was moments like these that left her questioning everything. Why was he so calm around her? Why wasn't he annoyed by her endless clumsiness? She couldn't understand it. And that's when the tension shifted. Oliver's gaze softened, and something unspoken hung between them. She felt the pull of it, the invisible line that seemed to draw them together even though it was utterly impossible. Take a break, he said suddenly, his voice smooth and casual. I'll finish this up. She stared at him, incredulous. What? I'll finish vacuuming. You've been at it for hours. His eyes locked onto hers, an intensity in his gaze that made Maya's heart skip. Come on, you look like you need a break. Maya didn't know how to react. She had been working non-stop all day, trying to avoid making any more mistakes. The thought of him doing her job, the job she felt she was barely qualified for, was overwhelming. She opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it. What would be the harm in letting him help? She was so tired. All right, she said quietly, lowering her gaze. I could use a moment. She moved toward the kitchen, her footsteps quick but hesitant. Her mind was still reeling from the unexpected offer. Why was he being so nice? It wasn't long before Maya found herself sitting on one of the plush couches in the living room, watching Oliver work. The sounds of the vacuum filled the room, but there was a calmness to it now, an intimacy she hadn't anticipated. Oliver's movements were fluid, practiced, as though he was used to cleaning up other people's messes. For some reason, watching him like this felt normal. Too normal. Maya folded her arms over her chest, looking at him through half-closed eyes. She felt silly, staring at him like this, but she couldn't help it. He was different when he wasn't in his suit, when he wasn't acting like the cold, controlled businessman she'd first met. I'm sorry, she blurted out, her voice soft. For earlier. Oliver paused, glancing up at her. For what? Helping you clean up? Maya bit her lip. No, for all the accidents. I keep messing things up, and I don't want you to think I'm incompetent or... He walked over to her, pausing in front of the couch. Maya, you've got it all wrong. I'm not upset with you. I don't know how to explain it. Maya's heart thudded in her chest. She knew she shouldn't be feeling this way, but she couldn't deny it. The pull, the chemistry, it was too strong to ignore. Why do you keep saying that? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. That I've got it all wrong. Oliver hesitated, his fingers tapping on the armrest of the couch. Because I don't think you're messing up. You're just different. He said the last word with a slight smile, but there was a tension in his voice, a quiet understanding. And honestly, I kind of like it. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She was speechless. No one had ever looked at her like that, like her clumsiness was something endearing, not a flaw to be hidden or corrected. You like it? She repeated, her voice shaky. I do, he replied, his smile growing more genuine. I like that you don't try to hide who you are. Maya's eyes widened as she processed his words. Her entire life, she had been trying to hide the messy parts of herself, trying to fit in with the world around her. But here, in this moment, in this penthouse with Oliver Stone, it felt different. She didn't have to hide. Not with him. Oliver's gaze softened. I think you're perfect, just the way you are. Maya felt a warmth spread through her, her chest tightening as she tried to catch her breath. Perfect? Impossible. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't even close. But the way Oliver was looking at her, like she was more than just a maid, more than just the clumsy woman who had stumbled into his life, made her start to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something about her that was worth seeing, worth appreciating. As the evening wore on, Maya couldn't shake the warmth that Oliver's words had left in her chest. It wasn't just the attraction, though that was undeniable. It was the sense that maybe she wasn't the only one who was scared. Maybe he was too. But as the night drew to a close, a sense of unease began to settle in. They were worlds apart, after all. She was a maid, barely scraping by, while Oliver was a billionaire. She didn't belong in his world. And yet, despite her every instinct telling her to retreat, to keep things professional, Maya found herself wanting to cross the line, to see where this, whatever this was between them, would go. Oliver had broken down the walls between them in a way no one else had, and it left Maya wondering how long she could keep pretending that the space between them wasn't just a little too small. Their moments together were still brief, but each one felt like a crack in the foundation of their carefully constructed lives. As Maya stared at Oliver across the room, the uncertainty gnawed at her. She was starting to feel something real. But how could it be real when everything around them screamed that it was impossible? She wasn't ready to answer that question. But the longer she stayed close to Oliver, the harder it became to ignore the truth she was trying to deny. Maya hadn't expected to find herself at the center of anything, let alone the center of attention. She'd spent most of her life flying under the radar, living in the background, unnoticed, just the way she liked it. But now, everything had changed. The whispers, the cameras, the flashing lights. She was no longer invisible. And it felt suffocating. It all started innocently enough, with a late-night conversation between her and Oliver. One evening, after Oliver had worked late in his study, they decided to share a quiet dinner. She wasn't sure when it happened, but in the course of their quiet talks, about life, about the past, about everything, they'd somehow crossed a line. They'd spent hours talking, and when Maya glanced at the clock, it was nearly midnight. Oliver had walked her to the door like he always did, and they had shared a brief but meaningful moment, an unspoken connection that left her heart pounding. And that was the last normal night they would have. The next morning, as Maya stepped out of the elevator to head to her usual duties, she felt the prickling sensation of being watched. She glanced around, her instincts immediately on edge. It wasn't just the usual quiet of the penthouse that she'd gotten used to. There were faces, strangers, paparazzi. Her stomach dropped. Maya's heart beat faster as she tried to shake off the feeling that she was being trapped in a fishbowl. She'd barely made it to the front door when the cameras hit her. Blinding flashes, rapid-fire questions, all of them targeting her. "Is it true you're seeing Oliver Stone?" one of them shouted, snapping a picture before she could even think of a response. "What's going on between you two? Is he your boyfriend?" another reporter asked, their camera lens like an invasive extension of their prying eyes. Maya stood frozen, her back pressed to the door, her face burning hot with a mix of confusion and embarrassment. She hadn't signed up for this. She had just been doing her job, taking care of things, trying to keep a low profile, and now she was being pulled into something far beyond her control. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her mind was a blur, her emotions caught between fear and disbelief. Before she could even speak, the door behind her opened, and there was Oliver. His tall figure filled the doorway, his face immediately taking on a hard edge as he stepped in front of her. "Back off," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. His presence was like a shield, blocking her from the relentless flashes. The crowd of reporters fell into an uneasy silence, but not without a few last, desperate questions. "Is she your new girlfriend, Mr. Stone?" one reporter asked. "Are you hiding something from the press?" another chimed in, the insinuation hanging heavy in the air. Oliver's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and seeing it directed at Maya made his blood boil. "I said back off," Oliver repeated, his tone dangerous now. The reporters hesitated, sensing the shift in his mood, and slowly began to retreat, their cameras still trained on him as they snapped a few more shots. Once they were gone, Oliver turned to Maya, his face softening slightly, though the tension remained. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't think this would happen. I didn't want you to get caught up in this." Maya, still trying to collect herself, stared at him in a daze. "Caught up in what? I'm just the maid." Her words came out harsh, bitter. "I didn't ask for this attention." Oliver's expression faltered for a moment. "I know," he replied, his voice sincere. "But it's happening, and we need to deal with it." Maya shook her head, feeling tears threaten to spill over. "I don't belong here. I don't belong in your world. I'm just clumsy." She looked down, embarrassed by how raw her words sounded. "And now the whole world is watching me. They'll never stop looking." Oliver took a step closer, gently lifting her chin so she met his gaze. "You belong here as much as anyone else," he said firmly. "You're not just the maid. You're Maya. Don't let anyone else define you." But his words, though comforting, didn't do much to ease the weight on her chest. The press, the rumors, the judgment, they were all things she wasn't prepared for. She could already feel it, the sting of being judged. The whispers from the staff, the raised eyebrows, the feeling of being out of place in Oliver's world. He had everything: wealth, status, power. She had nothing but her clumsiness, her insecurities, and her shattered sense of self-worth. That evening, as the door to the penthouse closed behind her, Maya found herself in the small, quiet space of the guest room she had grown accustomed to. The walls here were bare, save for a few minimalist pieces of art that Oliver had chosen for the space. It was simple, neat, a small corner of his world that she could never truly belong to. The events of the day had left her feeling emotionally exhausted. The night's dinner, where Oliver had so graciously shielded her from the press, felt like a distant memory. She sank down onto the bed, the soft sheets comforting against her skin, but it did little to quell the anxiety that had settled deep in her gut. "Why was I so stupid to think this could ever work?" she thought, her mind racing. "I'm just the maid, the help. And here I am, pretending to be part of his world, when I don't even belong here." She closed her eyes, the weight of her own insecurities threatening to crush her. It wasn't just the media's prying eyes, it was the reality of what had happened. She had crossed a line she hadn't even realized existed. And now she was in too deep, tangled in a relationship that could never be more than a fantasy. Meanwhile, Oliver stood at his office window, staring out at the sprawling city below. His reflection was a shadow in the glass, his mind miles away from the comfort of his penthouse. The press conference had been chaotic, and he could still feel the anger building inside him. He hated the way the world had suddenly turned its gaze on Maya. He hated the way it felt like she was being consumed by their expectations. And worse, he hated how much he cared. He had never let anyone get this close before. His entire life had been spent building an empire of cold, calculated decisions. Emotions were a risk he couldn't afford, and relationships were a luxury he had never had time for. His ex-wife, Veronica, had taught him that lesson in the harshest way possible. But Maya, she was different. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't a part of his world in the ways that mattered. But she had a vulnerability that made him want to protect her. When had that happened? When had she gotten under his skin so deeply? The next few days passed in a blur. The press continued to speculate, the tabloids running stories about the mysterious maid and her closeness with Oliver Stone. Maya stayed in her room more often than not, avoiding the press and the public eye. The whispers in the halls of the penthouse were unavoidable, and yet Oliver's protection remained. He continued to stand between her and the world, shielding her from the harsh realities of his life. But Maya couldn't help but feel the growing divide between them. The more he shielded her, the more distant he seemed. She started to question everything. Was this really just a protective gesture on his part? Or was there something more? As Maya looked out the window of her small room that evening, she realized that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And though Oliver's presence was a comfort, she could feel the distance between them growing, pulled apart by the weight of their worlds. And as the stars flickered above the city, she wondered if she could ever truly find her place in his world. The evening had started like any other. Maya, as usual, had spent the day moving through the rhythm of her duties, her steps measured, her clumsiness kept at bay in an effort to avoid drawing attention to herself. But nothing felt routine about the way the day had unfolded. The heavy air between her and Oliver had been building for days, weeks even. The silent, lingering tension between them was undeniable now. It was no longer just the awkwardness of their first few days together. Something deeper had taken root. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, how the smallest of touches lingered just a little too long, the words unsaid that they both knew hung in the air between them. They had crossed a line, but neither of them knew how to step back over it. As the day drew to a close, Maya found herself in the living room, tidying up the last of the mess from Oliver's late-night working session. The hum of the city filtered through the penthouse windows, but it couldn't quiet the rising unease that stirred inside her. Maya's heart beat faster as she heard Oliver's footsteps behind her. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. His gaze wasn't cold, but it was intense, more so than usual. He stood there, his jaw clenched, the weight of something unspoken between them pressing down on the air. "Can we talk?" Oliver's voice was low, almost hesitant. Maya's stomach dropped. She hadn't wanted to talk. She didn't want to face whatever was building between them, but she couldn't escape it anymore. She nodded slowly, her throat dry. "Sure," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He motioned for her to sit down, and Maya hesitated before settling into one of the plush armchairs. The space between them felt vast, like an ocean, but neither of them knew how to bridge it. Oliver stood across from her, rubbing the back of his neck as though trying to prepare himself for something. She could tell that this wasn't going to be a typical conversation. "Maya, he began, stopping himself, as if the words were caught in his throat. He closed his eyes for a moment, like he was trying to find the right way to say what had been building for weeks. "Oliver, what's going on?" Maya asked, her voice cracking slightly as the words spilled out. "You've been so distant lately. I can feel it. You keep pushing me away and I don't know why. I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't keep pretending that it's nothing. I'm not just some distraction for you to fix your problems, okay? I'm not just someone you can use to hide your emotions." The words came out faster than she intended, the floodgates opening as she finally spoke her mind. The truth she had been holding in for weeks, a truth she was terrified to face, slipped past her lips. She had thought about it over and over. Was she just a temporary distraction for Oliver? Was she just someone to fill the empty space left by his past? Oliver's expression shifted, his brow furrowing as her words cut deeper than she realized. He opened his mouth to respond, but Maya wasn't finished. She had to say it all. "I know I'm not what you expected," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just the maid. You're a billionaire, and I'm nobody. I don't belong in your world. I've always been the outsider, and I've never tried to fit in because I know I don't." She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "But I thought maybe this, us, could be real. But you're treating me like I'm something you need to fix, and I can't keep doing this." Oliver's face hardened, the silence stretching uncomfortably between them as his expression shifted. But when he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I never meant to make you feel like that," he said softly, stepping closer, his tone filled with an almost painful sincerity. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't expect it. You weren't supposed to get under my skin.
But you did. And I don't know what to do with that. Maya's breath caught in her chest as she stared at him, her mind reeling. He didn't expect this? He didn't mean for her to matter? Oliver ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to find the right words. I've been avoiding this for so long because I've been afraid of how I feel. I've been pushing you away because the truth is... His voice faltered, and he closed his eyes, as if gathering the courage to finally speak his heart. Maya's heartbeat quickened, her mind screaming at her to stop him, to protect herself. But she couldn't. She couldn't turn away now. The truth is, I've fallen for you, Oliver confessed, the words slipping out in a rush. I've fallen for your innocence, your vulnerability, everything about you, your heart, your soul. It's real, and it scares the hell out of me. Maya blinked, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to say it, to admit it. You're in love with me? He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I am. I know it's messy. I know it's complicated. But I can't deny it anymore. It's real. I'm in love with you, Maya. And I hate how much it terrifies me. Maya's mind reeled. She was stunned, shocked by the weight of his confession. She had never imagined hearing those words coming from Oliver. He had always been so guarded, so controlled. And now he was standing there, vulnerable, raw, and so incredibly real. But as much as she wanted to throw herself into his arms, to let the words sink in, something else held her back. Fear. Fear that this wasn't what it seemed. Fear that she had been the one to fall while he was still uncertain. Fear that she wasn't enough for someone like him. Oliver. Her voice trembled, the uncertainty lacing every word. I don't know how to believe you. I don't know if I can. You're a billionaire and I'm just... me. I'm not enough for you. I don't belong in your world. Oliver shook his head, his eyes intense with emotion. That's not true. You're more than enough for me. You always have been. Maya swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest as she met his gaze. But the doubt lingered, like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Could this really be real? Was she really the one he wanted? Or was it just another fleeting distraction in a world that was too big for her? I don't know if I can do this, Oliver, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can be with someone like you. Oliver's expression softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her face with his hands. Maya, I don't care about what we should be. I care about what we are. I don't need you to fit into my world. I need you to be you. The room was silent, save for the steady beat of their hearts. And as the truth hung heavy in the air, neither of them knew where they would go from here. But in that moment, they both knew one thing for sure. They could never go back to pretending. The confession had been made. Now, all they had to do was decide what to do with it. Maya had always prided herself on her ability to read situations, to assess the room and figure out where she fit in. But with Oliver, everything felt different. There were moments when she felt completely at ease with him, like she was just her, and nothing more. But then there were other moments, when she was alone with her thoughts, that everything seemed to spiral out of control. She wasn't just a maid anymore. And yet, she wasn't anything more than that either. It was as if her life had suddenly become a balancing act between two different worlds. The world she had always known, the world of simple, humble comforts, and the world Oliver had brought her into, a world of wealth, luxury, and expectations she couldn't keep up with. Maya found herself slipping back into her old insecurities. She had never felt like she belonged in Oliver's world, and now, with every lingering touch and every smile, she could feel herself teetering on the edge of something she couldn't define.
Oliver had been nothing but kind to her. He had shared his vulnerabilities, his past, and his heart. But still, something about the world he inhabited, the people, the lifestyle, the power, left her feeling like an imposter. She thought about it as she stood in front of the window of her small room, looking out over the city lights. The penthouse seemed to glisten in the night, its sleek, modern design a symbol of everything Oliver had worked for. And here she was, standing in the shadows, unsure of her place. The thought of them, her and Oliver, felt so fragile, like it could break at any moment. Oliver, for his part, felt the shift too. Maya had pulled away ever since that night, the night he had told her how he felt. The words had come so easily then, spilling out like a confession he couldn't hold back. But now, every interaction felt like an obstacle. There was a tension in the air whenever they were together. She was quieter, more reserved, her smile more forced. He wasn't blind to it. The way she looked at him sometimes, like she wasn't sure she belonged by his side. The way she would pull back when he got too close. It wasn't the same playful Maya he had grown to know, the one who had tripped over herself and laughed with him. Now, there was hesitation in her eyes, doubt that was hard to ignore. It made him angry. Not at her, but at the world. The weight of his life, his empire, was starting to feel like a burden. It was supposed to be the thing he had fought for, the thing that had given him control, but all it seemed to do was push Maya away. Was this the price he had to pay? To have it all, but lose the one person who had ever made him feel like more than just a businessman? It happened one evening when they were having dinner together, a rare moment of quiet in the penthouse. Maya was sitting across from him, stirring her soup slowly, her eyes downcast. The space between them felt larger than usual, and Oliver couldn't ignore it anymore. "Maya," he started, his voice low. "We need to talk." She looked up at him, her expression guarded. "About what?" "About this," he gestured between them. "About us." Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat, looking away. "There's nothing to talk about, Oliver," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Yes, there is," he replied, his frustration rising. "Maya, I feel like you've been pulling away from me lately. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to keep pretending that things are okay when they're not." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time in a long while, he saw the vulnerability in them. She opened her mouth to speak, but then stopped, her lips trembling. "I'm not pretending," she said quietly, looking away. "It's just, this is all too much, Oliver. I don't belong here. In your world. With you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He set down his fork, leaning forward. "What are you talking about? You belong here with me. I don't care about the difference in our worlds. I care about you." Maya shook her head, her hands curling into fists on the table. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "You've built this whole life for yourself, this perfect life, and I'm just the maid, the help. I don't fit in your world. I don't know how to be who you want me to be." "I don't want you to be anyone but yourself," Oliver said, his voice gentle, though there was a trace of frustration. "Maya, this is not about class or status. It's about us. It's about what we have between us." She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "What we have isn't real," she said, her words coming out harsh. "It's just a fantasy. You don't really want me, Oliver. You can't. I'm just a distraction for you." "Maya, stop," Oliver said, his voice sharp, standing up and reaching for her arm. She flinched, but he gently pulled her back toward him, his eyes desperate. "Don't say that. You mean everything to me. Everything." She took a step back, her face full of pain. "How can I believe you when you live in a world I can never be part of? How can I believe you when I know that one day you'll look at me and realize I don't belong here?" Oliver stared at her,
the weight of her words settling in his chest. His mind raced as he tried to process everything, his feelings for her fear of being with him, the impossibility of their worlds. But one thing was clear. He didn't want to lose her. Not now. Not ever. "I can't lose you, Maya," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I've built this world around me, but I don't need it anymore. I don't need the empire if it means losing you. I'll burn it all down if it means being with you." Maya's eyes widened at his words, her breath catching in her throat. "You'd throw it all away for me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "If it meant we could have a real life together, I would. I'm willing to sacrifice it all." She stood still for a moment, processing his words. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "I don't know if I can trust that," she whispered. "I don't know if I can trust you." Oliver reached out for her, his hand gently cupping her face. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he said softly. "But please, let me prove it to you. Let me show you that I want this, more than anything." Maya's chest tightened as she looked at him. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could make this work, but the fear still lingered. The fear of being exposed, the fear of losing herself. "I'm scared, Oliver," she whispered. "I'm scared of what this is doing to me, and I don't know how to let go of the fear." "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady and full of certainty. "We'll figure it out together." The conversation between them hung in the air like smoke, their hearts heavy with words unspoken and fears that neither could ignore. Neither of them had the answers yet, but one thing was clear. They couldn't keep running from the truth. Whether they were ready to face it or not, their worlds had collided, and there was no going back. The phone call came in the early hours of the morning, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the penthouse. Maya had barely closed her eyes, her mind still spinning from the conversation she and Oliver had shared the night before. The uncertainty between them hung in the air, and no matter how much she tried to push it aside, the tension was palpable. The sharp ring of the phone echoed through the quiet hallway, and Maya's eyes fluttered open. She could hear Oliver moving across the room, his footsteps hurried and tense, even in the stillness of the night. A sense of dread curled in her stomach. She watched as Oliver answered the call, his face hardening as the words reached him. "Oliver?" Maya called softly from the bed, her voice thick with sleep and concern. But the look in his eyes stopped her. "I have to go," he said abruptly, hanging up the phone. His tone was sharp, more urgent than she'd ever heard him before. Maya pushed herself up on the bed, her heart pounding. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She had never seen him like this, frozen, almost like a man who had just been hit with a tidal wave. "It's my father," Oliver said, his jaw clenched. He didn't need to say more. Maya could see the storm cloud forming behind his eyes, a swirl of emotions that had nothing to do with her but everything to do with his past. She knew in that moment something had shifted. A door had opened, one that led straight into Oliver's past, to the very things he had locked away for so long. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he said, his voice suddenly quieter, more fragile. But even as he spoke, Maya could see that the distance between them was widening once again. She could feel it, the coldness that was never fully gone, the weight of his emotional baggage pressing down on him, on them. Maya wanted to ask more, to push him for answers, but something held her back. The instinct to let him go, to give him space to deal with whatever this was stronger than her need for reassurance. She nodded. Her lips parted as she watched him turn away, his back to her as he grabbed his jacket and made his way to the door. The world felt heavy, as if every step he took was pushing him further away from her. Hours passed, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet in the penthouse was just the calm before the storm. She tried to distract herself, folding the laundry, straightening the rooms,
anything to keep her mind from spiraling. But the tension was unbearable, suffocating her, as she wondered what was happening to them. She thought about the night before, when they had spoken so openly about their fears and desires. The vulnerability they'd shared had been real. But now, standing in the empty apartment, that closeness felt distant, like it had never really existed. The sound of Oliver's footsteps broke her reverie as he returned, the door clicking shut behind him. He was drenched in sweat, his face pale, but his eyes were harder than before. Maya could feel it, the emotional weight that had settled into his bones. He wasn't just coming back from a family emergency. He had come back with pieces of himself that he hadn't been ready to face. "Maya," he said, his voice rough. "I need to talk to you." Maya turned to face him, her heart in her throat. "What happened?" Oliver stood still for a moment, his hand gripping the back of the chair. His breath was shallow, and the silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. Finally he spoke, his words slow, deliberate. "It's my ex-fiancée, Veronica." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, Maya saw the cracks in his facade. She's been trying to reach me. My father had a stroke. And Veronica, she's the one who's been dealing with everything in the family. He trailed off, his hands trembling. Maya felt her stomach drop. She didn't know what to say. Veronica. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known about Veronica. Everyone in Oliver's circle knew. But hearing him talk about her like this, about their unresolved past, felt like a weight she hadn't been prepared for. "You didn't tell me about her," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Veronica. I didn't know." "I didn't want you to know," Oliver said quickly, his words sharp. "Because it's complicated, and it's not fair to you." His eyes met hers, and Maya could see the anguish there. "She's part of my past, but she's still here, and I don't know how to handle it." Maya took a step back, her mind racing. It wasn't just about Veronica. It was about everything. Oliver's past, his emotional scars, the distance that he kept between them. She had always known there was something dark and unresolved in his life, something that pulled him away from her. But hearing him say it out loud, seeing the toll it took on him, made it all too real. "I can't do this," Maya whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I can't keep pretending that this—" She gestured between them, her voice cracking. "This is going to work. You can't just leave me hanging while you go back to your past, Oliver. You're still holding on to her. I can't be a part of that." Oliver's face hardened, his expression a mixture of hurt and frustration. "Maya, you don't understand. I'm trying. I'm really trying to make this work with you, but I don't know how to fix the broken parts of myself. And every time I try, it feels like I'm just failing you, failing us." "I'm not asking you to fix anything," Maya said, her chest tightening. I need you to be here. With me." Her voice faltered as she stepped back, her emotions starting to overwhelm her. "But it's not fair, Oliver. You can't keep pulling me into your world and then pushing me away whenever it gets hard." Oliver's eyes widened, and he took a step forward, but Maya held up a hand, stopping him. "No. I need to go. I can't keep pretending this is something it's not." "Maya, please!" Oliver's voice broke through, but she was already shaking her head, tears filling her eyes. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." She turned and walked away before he could stop her, her heart pounding in her chest. The days that followed were filled with silence. Oliver tried to reach out to her, texts, calls, but Maya didn't respond. The distance between them was no longer just physical. It was emotional. Maya couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that told her she was making the right decision. But a part of her, the part that loved him, was still torn. And so, for the first time,
She made the decision to leave. Not just Oliver's penthouse, but his world. He was right. She didn't belong there. And if she stayed, she would just keep getting hurt. But as she packed her things, Oliver returned. "Please don't go," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes filled with pain. "Maya, I need you." She couldn't look at him. She couldn't let him see the turmoil she was feeling. But when she didn't answer, Oliver's face softened, his resolve breaking. "I'm sorry. I can't let you go." "Not like this." For the first time, Oliver wasn't just fighting for her, he was fighting for himself. He was fighting for the future they could have, not the past that had haunted him for so long. "I'm ready to let go of all of it," he said, his voice raw. "I'll face the past, Maya. I'll face whatever it takes if it means we have a future together." Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she met his gaze. For the first time, she saw him truly vulnerable. He wasn't just the billionaire anymore. He was the man who had been broken by his past, and was now willing to break free from it. "I'll stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you have to let go of her. Of the past." Oliver nodded, a slow, heartfelt smile spreading across his face as he stepped forward, his hands gently cupping her face. "I will. I promise." And in that moment, as their worlds collided in a way neither could have predicted, they both realized that the fight for love wasn't just about holding on, it was about letting go. As Maya and Oliver stood there, their worlds finally aligning, they knew it was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But for the first time, they both felt like they could walk that road together, side by side. The soft, golden light of the late afternoon filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The city below buzzed with life, cars speeding down streets, people weaving through crowds, the faint hum of the world continuing as it always did. But inside this quiet sanctuary, everything felt different now. Everything felt at peace. Maya sat on the edge of the plush couch, her hands resting on her lap, eyes focused on the view outside. There was a quiet stillness in her, one that felt earned. The chaotic rush of emotions and fears had faded, and in its place, a sense of calm had settled in her chest. She turned her head slightly, meeting Oliver's gaze across the room. He stood by the window, his broad shoulders framed by the light as he gazed out at the city. His silhouette was familiar, yet somehow new. There was an openness in him now, a kind of quiet contentment that hadn't been there before. His once guarded demeanor had melted away, replaced by a tenderness she hadn't expected but had come to crave. It was the first time in a long while that they didn't feel like two people from separate worlds. "Oliver," Maya's voice was soft, but it broke the silence like a gentle ripple in calm water. "I've been thinking." He turned toward her, his eyes soft with an unreadable expression, but there was warmth there. Something he hadn't allowed himself to show anyone in a long time. "About what?" Maya hesitated, her fingers absently tracing the fabric of her skirt. "About us," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty but also with something deeper, something more sure. "About everything we've been through." Oliver stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, like he didn't want to disrupt the quiet space they had carved for themselves. "What about us?" "I've spent so much of my life hiding parts of myself," Maya said quietly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Hiding the things that made me. My clumsiness, my fears. I've always thought of them as weaknesses." She paused, feeling the weight of her own words. "But with you, I've learned that they're just parts of who I am. I'm not perfect, Oliver. I don't have it all figured out and I don't always know what to do, but I'm learning to accept myself." Oliver's lips twitched upward as he knelt down in front of her, his face coming into her line of sight.
And I love you for it, he said softly, his hand reaching for hers. I've spent my life hiding behind this perfect image of myself, this facade of control. But with you, I feel like I can breathe. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be me. With you. Maya's chest tightened at his words, and she swallowed hard, feeling a rush of emotion that left her speechless for a moment. There had always been so many things she thought she needed to change about herself to fit into the world Oliver lived in. But now, with him looking at her the way he did, she realized that it wasn't about changing who she was. It was about accepting each other for who they truly were. Flaws and all. I used to think that my clumsiness made me less, that I wasn't worthy of love because I wasn't perfect, she whispered. But now I realize that my mistakes, my insecurities, they don't define me. They're just pieces of the puzzle that make me who I am. And you. Her voice faltered, but she steadied herself. You make me feel like I'm enough, just as I am. Oliver smiled, his fingers gently caressing her hand. You're more than enough, Maya. You're everything I've ever wanted, even when I didn't realize it. She blinked, trying to keep the tears at bay, but the depth of his words hit her like a wave, overwhelming her with emotion. It was like a dam had broken inside her, all the fear and self-doubt flooding out, leaving nothing but the truth that had been buried for so long. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I was scared that I'd never be enough for you, that I'd always be in your shadow, a part of your world that didn't belong. Oliver's eyes softened as he lifted her chin gently with his finger, tilting her face so that their gazes locked. You've always been enough. Always. For a moment there was nothing but silence between them. The air felt thick with the weight of everything that had been said, and for the first time, neither of them felt the need to say anything more. It was as if the unspoken truths had already been laid bare. There was no need for anything else. Oliver leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a kiss that was soft, tender, and full of promises they didn't need to voice. It was a kiss that spoke of acceptance, of understanding, of love that had been built on vulnerability and trust. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers, his hands gently cupping her face. I never thought I could feel this way again, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I had to keep myself closed off. But with you, everything's different. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had never felt more seen, more understood than she did in this moment. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. I never thought I could love someone like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I do, and I'm not afraid anymore. Not with you. Oliver smiled, his hands gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Maya. I'm here, and I'm never going to let you go. The days that followed felt different, lighter. They had come to an understanding, a realization that the love they shared wasn't about perfection, wasn't about fitting into a mold or living up to some ideal. It was about embracing each other as they were, flaws, scars, insecurities, and all. The differences between their worlds no longer seemed like barriers. They were just pieces of the story that had brought them together. Maya's clumsiness, her vulnerability, her need for reassurance. These were the things that made her real. And Oliver's past, his emotional scars, his carefully constructed empire, those were the things that had shaped him into the man she loved. Together they were building something new, something real, a future where they could both be themselves, without fear or shame. Later that evening, as they sat together on the couch, their fingers intertwined, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had always felt like an outsider, like she was on the fringes of the life Oliver led. But now, she understood. She didn't need to change who she was to fit into his world. She just needed to be herself. And in his eyes, she could see that herself was exactly what he needed. Oliver leaned back, his arm around her shoulder as he looked out the window at the city below. "I used to think that my success was the most important thing," he said softly. "But now I know it's not. You're what matters. You're what I've been searching for." Maya smiled, resting her head against his chest. "And you're what I've been searching for too," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I don't need anything more than this. Just you." Oliver kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "You'll always have me." Maya's virginity, once a symbol of her innocence, had become something entirely different in Oliver's eyes. It was a symbol of trust, of love, of the vulnerability they had shared. It wasn't about purity, it was about the journey they had taken together, the way they had grown and learned from each other. And as the city lights shimmered below, Maya felt something shift within her. She was no longer the girl who was afraid of being imperfect. She was the woman who had found love, not because she was flawless, but because she was real. And that, in the end, was all she needed. The story had come full circle. Maya and Oliver were no longer two people from different worlds. They were just them. Two people who had found something real in a world full of illusions. And as they sat together, hand in hand, the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. This was their beginning. And nothing, no past, no mistake, could ever take that away. For more emotional rides like this, subscribe now. We've got twists, tears, and triumphs waiting just for you. What's your take? Can love really rewrite the rules? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, dream bold, love fierce.